Jen is the executive director of One to World, and we are very happy to have her here, especially to talk about the education landscape and the cause areas she works with in light of International Day of Education. So, Jen, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and why is it that you're working with One to World?
Sure. So I've been the executive director with One to World since 2016. And I come to the organization because of a diverse background. I started my career in the private sector, but very quickly decided to move into the public sector. So I used to work for the Canadian government I'm originally from Canada. And I worked for the Canadian government international development area. So I was managing programs over in Africa. Subsequently, when I moved to the United States, I started working in higher education. So I started working at colleges and universities here in the US. And then where I find myself now at One to World is a nice blend of those two pieces. So we bring international students and Fulbright scholars that are here studying in the United States, get them together with local residents to exchange ideas and perspectives and to kind of expand each other's worlds a little bit. So I get to blend my international background along with the higher education, which I think is so important.
Absolutely. And I'm really curious about what you mentioned, that how you kind of bring together people from diverse backgrounds, right? Fulbright scholars and just people who are from different countries. So what exactly is that program like? How does it function?
Sure. So each year, New York City and the surrounding areas, the surrounding colleges and universities host, in a typical year, almost 100,000 international students from 140 plus countries. These students are coming to us sometimes for the first time. So they're arriving in the country, they're a little disoriented, getting settled in. We bring them off their campuses and get them involved in the community so that they can have a much richer experience. It also benefits the community, of course, because these students bring a perspective and a cultural, from their countries that are so unique to us. So these programs range anywhere from social outings, we get them outside the city into the countryside doing apple picking and stuff like that. We do receptions, but also we do things where they're actually brought together in more substantive programming. For example, one of the programs that we do is with the US military colleges, and we actually get a delegation of international students to sit down with the US cadets and talk about foreign affairs of the United States, that kind of thing. So we do about 100 plus programs a year that involve these students, and we find that both the local residents benefit immensely from these experiences. Americans probably don't travel quite as much as other countries, and I do find, one of our flagship programs actually is a program called Global Classroom, where we train these international students and Fulbright scholars to go into the primary and secondary schools here in the US or in the New York area to bring their cultures, bring their countries, talk about international issues, global issues. And they're speaking to a lot of students who may not ever get a chance to leave the United States. And so these students are kind of unofficial ambassadors for their countries, and basically kind of open the perspective for these grade school students, get them to see countries they may never see in person, but now are inspired to perhaps also study abroad or go abroad and learning so much from them. So
I love the perspective that you brought up here, that a lot of times US folks, they don't get to travel as much, and since a lot of countries they come to US for educational purposes, and of course there's so much of cultural diversity that thrives in US, and it's so important for people to learn and unlearn about different cultures. So I'd like to understand from you what has that impact been for your students, for the beneficiaries?
What are some of the benefits we found for the students?
What has that impact?
Sure. International education, for those who aren't aware, in the United States is a very significant sector. It is an export of sorts because the world is coming to the U.S., but it is it is still a very important stop for a lot of students to come over here and study. So those students for the communities, we speak in terms of both the cultural value and impact, as well as the economic value and impact for the United States. So, it's over $40 billion we're gonna have to edit that one out. I don't have that number, so anyways. So there's the economic benefit, but there's also the cultural and idea benefit. And so the international students themselves, get the opportunity to study in the U.S. In some cases, they get to extend that to work in the U.S. On some additional training after their degree. So there's the value of the experience. We know that, statistically, we understand that people who can work across cultures, groups that are diverse populations, work better together. They're more creative, more innovative. And so, what we've seen here in the U.S. from some of these students, they've gone on to start companies here in the United States. Some of our largest billion-dollar-plus companies have been started by international students. So you're looking at a significant economic impact, companies like SpaceX and Stripe and others. But the personal perspectives, I think, is best captured by the students who talk to us about the fact that they've come to a foreign country, they're not really sure how to navigate it, and then One to World provides them kind of a home away from home. It's a community that we have built over years so that they feel much more welcome. They feel much more part of the community. One of our programs gets them into volunteering locally, so they have an opportunity to get involved in other community-based organizations here. We just ran a program this week where a group of international students get together and go out and deliver food and goods to the homeless. So this is an opportunity for them to see all aspects of the United States, not necessarily what they would see in the media or movies, and get to see kind of the real U.S., the real New York.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very, very creative space, and also a space that is making a lot of impact. So I'd like to know from you that how was that journey like during the pandemic? Because a lot of students were in their home countries, and it was a difficult time. People were isolated. There were a surge in mental health problems. So how did you create that safe space?
It's interesting. So when the pandemic hit, we were, of course, in the middle of the school year. And so there were thousands of students stuck in New York City, trapped here during the pandemic. They couldn't get home. And so for those final months of that year, we were able to actually transition most of our programs to a virtual space. Obviously, some were not possible, but we were able to do a number of programming, both for the international students, those that are in college, as well as the students that are in grade school. We were able to do those on a virtual platform. And I think it was particularly critical for those students at that time, because most of us were all locked up in our apartments or our homes. And so they didn't have an opportunity to have any community at that point. And so they were far away from home in a pandemic, in a city that was very hard hit at the beginning of the pandemic. We had some of the highest rates of infection here. And so they were scared and they were far away from loved ones. So we were able to create a safe space for them to gather, share ideas. We still did some of our, professional development programs and that kind of thing, but it was also just an opportunity for them to talk to each other, and to have a place to share what they were going through. For the young students that we work with in the public schools here in New York, they too were struggling. They had just suddenly had to bring their school home. Everybody was struggling with remote education at that point. And some of our programs had to transition from what we may have regularly talked about, whatever theme you were working on, to just give them a safe space to gather again, because they weren't allowed to gather in person. So I think our programming at that time was particularly critical. And as the pandemic progressed this past year, the year that we're in, it's such a hard time to keep track of time, but the year that we're in now, while the students were able to return this year, we're still, sorry, let me go back. So the second year of the pandemic, when the students couldn't come to the US. So we had a significant drop in the number of students who could actually arrive here in the US. We were still working with those overseas though. We had some students that were dialing in from their home countries, but they were attending colleges here in the US virtually. We were actually also able to connect with a lot of our alumni who live around the world. And so they were able to participate in our programs virtually. And then we continued to do programming online for the public school students for those schools, because they were also providing everything virtual. So I will say that while in some respects it was extremely helpful and beneficial for our programs, they do not quite compare to the in-person programs, because we do believe that face-to-face experience is critical in really breaking down barriers and getting to know people. I think it was an awesome thing to have in place at that time, but as we're seeing with this current year, it is nice to have people back in person. You get to know them more. There's just a lot more informality about gathering in person than it is on a virtual platform. But as we're seeing with the current Omicron uptick here, we are going to be doing a hybrid model again this year. So we'll be doing a lot of stuff. We're going to continue to do the virtual programs, as well as doing the very safely held in-person programs.
All right. So firstly, congratulations on being able to sustain your nonprofit and also finding out creative ways to do so. Unfortunately, a lot of nonprofits had to shut down. A lot of shelter homes couldn't function because of the funding barriers. And so for you to even sustain during such a difficult time is a big achievement. And on top of that, on a very personal note, pandemic was a very, very sad time. And it was a time when everyone's survival mode was on. Everyone wanted to, just take care of themselves and their families. So people like you who work for nonprofits, at that time, you went out of your way to help those people. So that says a lot about you. So thank you for doing that, Jen. And the next question that I have is that you're doing such an amazing job. So how can we help? How can people who are corporate volunteers, who have the time and have the money, but don't necessarily cannot spend loads of hours or days, how can we contribute to One to World in a way that is helpful to you?
So there are a number of ways. I mean, obviously funding is always important. As you mentioned, the nonprofit, nonprofit sector is not a corporate sector. So we always appreciate the support. Financial support, that is, but we also, a number of our programs rely on corporations and individuals to be what we call our hosts. And so we do professional development programming. Any kind of career assistance that folks would like to do. We've done resume building, interviews, networking, different topics along those lines. I know that for those companies that are located in the United States, for example, the students that come here really want to take advantage of what we call OPT, which is an optional practical training that they can do after they graduate. And they really struggle to find those placements. So, helping us connect them with great places for them to work for a year while they can, or 3, depending on if they're STEM students, for example, in sciences and maths and stuff. But so those types of opportunities, and then also hosting any number of our programs. So we do, those that are located in the New York area, for the in-person programs, we're always looking for hosts to bring the students into their home or their businesses. But even virtually, we do a number of programs where they can also participate. So I'd say, participating in our programs, welcoming the students, and I would say for anyone who's outside of our geographic area or outside of our reach, look to those international students in your own community, or look for those from away, whether they be students or immigrants, and remember that they're tackling a lot on top of just going through life at the moment. And so to be more welcoming for those that are from away and that are visiting, whether they be students temporarily or they're moving here permanently. So wherever you are, I would encourage people to have an open mind and an open heart and have curiosity when they meet people from other parts of the world.
Yeah, I love the spirit that you spoke in. Firstly, in terms of really telling us specifically how we can help. So that really helps to know exactly how can I help your nonprofit. of it. And secondly, the spirit of volunteering, that even if I cannot volunteer, just be kind and welcoming and generous to people who may come from different backgrounds. So thank you, Jen, for that. And just a last thing that I'd like for you to leave a message for people watching this video. Just a little motivational message for them to come forward and volunteer for One to World.
One to World gives an opportunity to people to basically bring the world to them. It's kind of in the nature of our name. We bring one person to the world. And so it's an opportunity to relate and interact and engage with people from all over, different backgrounds, different perspectives. We're big proponents of cultural exchange, big proponents of growth and education. And so this opportunity to reach out to the world without necessarily even having to leave your home or your hometown, we think is a great opportunity to share ideas and perspectives. So we encourage anyone to get involved with One to World and you'll also conceivably make a friend for life. We have a lot of our former students and hosts are staying connected for years and years in the future. So it's not just for the present. You might end up with friends forever.
Thank you. That was a lovely message. And with that, we come to the end of the interview. Thank you, Jen, so much for your time. If there's anything that you think I missed, you can mention it below and lead insert.
No, I think that's good. I was just going to say that, from a corporate perspective, we know that students who study abroad and students who have intercultural exchanges bring that perspective into the corporation. And so in the day of diversity and inclusion and the importance of bringing different perspectives into the corporate culture, starting young with the folks that we work with, whether they be in primary and secondary school or those that are in college, to set that tone already at that point that can be brought into the company culture, which then just adds to that innovation and creativity that corporations can benefit from.
That was actually very, very thought-provoking. I had to take 10 seconds to understand what that means, and that's very, very relevant. And yeah, it's like I feel like that's a form of investment. If you help those kids right now, they are the ones who will earn, and they'll spend in a very wise way, which helps the community in a very, very tangible and sustainable way. So yeah, I love that message. Thank you, Jen. But before you leave, so we have a ritual where we take a screenshot of this, and in that screenshot we do a gesture or a symbol or a sign of some sort, which may be something that you do with your beneficiaries or your students. So just to kind of make it more personalized and more non-profit centric.
Trying to think of what that would be. I mean, my fear is that. So Nandini, I'm curious, where, because you guys are based in India, correct? With a office in California?
Yes.
So the people viewing this are going to be mostly from whereabouts?